So I wanted to do a quick recap lesson on operations with integers. So just remember that integers are those numbers that can be positive or negative. So it describes a set of numbers that includes all of those negative numbers. And so in class today we talked about, well, when the heck would you use a negative number? Well, the reality is we use them all the time. When we're representing temperature, for example, right? So if we say, well, it's minus 30 degrees Celsius outside, we've used a negative number. Sometimes we use negative numbers to represent, the fact that maybe you owe money to somebody, right? You're in the negative. So we're going to start our discussion by looking at how to add and subtract integers. So a typical example that you might see and be asked to simplify is one like this. So -6 plus -7 and then equals, right? And so your job is to find out what the two of them combined to give you. So, what I find in my experience is that students often confuse this negative up front here with the signs that are in the middle. So it's important for you to know that the first value, and that may be a negative value, tells you basically the starting point, right, where you're starting from. The signs in the middle here, really, they tell you whether you're increasing or decreasing that value that you started with. And then the last amount tells you what the change is. So let's look at a number line and work this question out to show you what I mean by that. So if I were starting with this particular example here, I would see, well, I have -6. So I'm going to find the -6 on my number line, and that is basically where I'm starting. So I'm going to write a little dot in there. Okay? And then when I look at these two symbols together, well, we're going to talk about how to interpret these symbols. But I'm adding -7. Well, that really means that I'm subtracting 7. And so, what that means for me is that I'm going to move in the negative direction. I'm going to make this a larger negative value by 7. So 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I would continue on 5, 6, 7. So it should be obvious to you that I'm ending up over in this spot, and that actually will give me -13. Right? So I'm taking an already negative number and I'm making it more negative. Another way to think about this, if you ever get confused, I often think to myself, well, I think of it in terms of temperature. Well, if the temperature outside is -6 and I'm adding -7 more to that, I'm going to be at -13. So here are some simple rules to help you using a number line to help you solve some of these problems. I'm hoping that you'll graduate to not needing to rely on the number line, but if you're confused at the beginning and you want to rely on it, that's totally acceptable. So when adding a number, you're going to be increasing the number. So that means on your number line you're going to be moving to the right. So, making the number a larger positive number, moving in the positive direction. So for example, in this first example, I'm starting at 6, +6, and I'm adding 4. So that means I'm going to move to the right 4 units. So 1, 2, 3, 4. So that tells me that 6 plus 4 is 10. And that's no big surprise. And I used that example because I knew it would be one that you would feel comfortable with. Let's do an example that involves a negative number. So remember that the first value that I see tells me my starting point on the number line. So either, in the number line in my head or the number line that I've written out on paper. So that tells me that I'm starting at -2. Then I'm adding 7 more. So again, I'm adding, so I'm moving to the right in the positive direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when I do that, I ended up at +5. And of course, if it's a positive number, I don't need to put the positive in front. I can if I like, but it's not required. Okay, now it's really important to make sense of your value. So again, I always try to think about it in terms of temperature. So if I'm starting out at -2 degrees Celsius and the temperature goes up by 7 degrees Celsius, well, what is the temperature going to be? It's going to be, I'm going to be at +5, so that'll be a definite improvement in the temperature. When subtracting, however, you should know that you're really decreasing that number, right? You're making, so that's going to cause you to move into the negative direction, so to the left, right? So you're making a number smaller. So let's look at this first very familiar example. So for example, this 6 tells me that's where I'm starting. So I'm going to go over here at the 6. And then I'm going to go down by 4. So -4 means I'm taking 4 away. So I'm going to make the number smaller by 4. 3, 4. And that, of course, gives me 2, which should be no big surprise. Looking at this example, the second example, which involves negative values, well, this -2 tells me that is where I'm starting on my number line. I'm starting right here. And I'm going down, this negative means down, by 7 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And so I end up at -9. Let's think about that in terms of temperature. If it's -2 degrees outside and the temperature goes down by 7 more, I'm going to be at -9 degrees. Hopefully that made sense. So you may remember at the first example that we used had 2 signs that were sort of sandwiched in the middle. So I want to show you what I mean by that. So these 2 signs in the middle here, I call those sandwiched. They're sandwiched in the middle of these other 2 values that are, that are actual numbers. So I find that it makes the most sense to me to rewrite that using a single sign instead of 2 separate signs, right? So let's go through the rules that will help you to, hopefully simplify and make this a less confusing process to think about. So it's important for you to know that adding a positive number is the same as just regular adding, okay? So 6 plus +4 is just the same thing as saying 6 plus 4. And why is that? Well, every number, other than the negative numbers, all positive numbers really do have a positive in front of them. It's just that we choose not to write it because we understand that to be true. And so now that we've simplified this, we can simply add the values together and we're good to go. Let's look at, so adding a negative or subtracting a positive number is the same as just simple subtraction. So, for example, when I see that, I'm adding a negative number here, really that just means that I'm subtracting. So, I can rewrite this, and it may be less confusing to think about this way, as 6 minus 4. Okay, in the second example, I'm really, these 2 examples mean the same thing. They're just written in different ways. I'm saying 6, I'm going to take away +4. Well, remember what I said in the last little bit? Any number that has a positive in front of it is just a regular old plain number. So rewriting that as 6 minus, and I'm just going to omit this positive here, 4. And of course, we know that the answer to both of those questions is 2, right? Let's look at one last situation that you might encounter and explain that for you, and hopefully you may remember it from elementary school, but if not, it'll reinforce a really important concept. Okay, so the last but not least, let's look at these sandwiched signs. So in this case, what I have is I'm subtracting a negative here, right? So I've got these 2 negatives in a row. Well, I will often say in class, well, if you have 2 negatives right beside each other, these 2 pieces will combine to make a positive sign, right? So rewriting this, I'm going to say, well, 6 minus -4 is like saying 6 plus 4. And now this becomes a super easy question. We know what 6 plus 4 is. It's 10. But just don't forget, when I see these negatives beside each other, they're sandwiched beside each other, and so that means that it becomes a positive. All right, so let's go through one more set of rules that may help to simplify all of this for you. Maybe not, but hopefully, if you're still confused, maybe this is an extra trick that will help you. So when you're adding or subtracting integers, a quick way to know what to do is to know that if you have the same inside signs or the same sandwiched signs, that means addition. So for example, if I were to have an example like this one, let's say I had 6 plus positive 4. Well, that just means the signs in the middle here are sandwiched, right? Ooh, that looks like a smiley face. So that just means that I'm going to say 6 plus 4. I'm reading it. It's just simplifying it. Another situation would be if I have another two signs that are the same, like two minuses, two subtractions. So 6 minus negative 4. Well, we just saw that, and we know that if we have a negative and I'm subtracting a negative, then that means that I am actually simply adding. And so there I've simplified. Okay. Another situation is, well, let's say I have different signs. Well, let's say I have 6 minus positive 4. Right? The signs are different, and so that means I'm automatically, that's a subtraction. Okay. And if I have 6 plus 4, negative 4 that is. The signs are different sandwiched in there, positive and negative, so that means I'm subtracting, right? So this would be, in either case, 6 minus 4. So the good news is that the adding and subtracting of integers is the tougher part. Multiplying and dividing is fairly straightforward, and I've outlined the rules here. So if you have a positive number and you multiply that by a positive number, you end up with another positive number, and that should be no surprise. A good example, let me do a couple quick examples of this. So for example, if I had, let's use some simple numbers, so 2, positive 2, times positive 3, well, that equals positive 6. So I've got a negative, or positive times a positive will always give me that positive value here. That's nothing different than anything you've ever done before. So negative 2, however, if I take a negative and I multiply it by another negative, like in this example here, then my answer will also be positive. So it's a similar rule to what we just saw. The signs are different, then the answer is positive. And so I'm just going to multiply the values by each other, and then the signs together tell me what the sign of my answer will be. Right? So moving on, if I have different signs, a negative times a positive or a positive times a negative, like in this example I'm about to do, so negative 2 plus 3, or oops, negative 2 times positive 3, that is, right? I see the signs are different, negative and positive. That means my answer is going to be a negative. So a negative times a positive will always give me a negative. One last little bit before we sign off. If you're ever stuck or you want to check your work, there is always this negative button on your calculator. I don't want you to confuse that with your subtraction button, but that may help you to solve problems or to check them when you're confused, or you just want to double check your work to make sure you haven't made any errors. Ask me any questions if you have any. I'm happy to help you over the lunch hour.